being a basketball player, it was easy for me to put a ball in my hand, go to the gym, and just zone out, just escape life, right? Maybe that's not for you. Maybe yours is retail shopping. Maybe yours is your own work and money. And maybe yours is going to go party, going to go club. I mean, we could think of the more extremes in that arena, but sometimes it's more the quiet things that we do that keeps us from just acknowledging the well of emotions that we're experiencing. And I've been there. Hey, when I get here, that's when I'm able to start dating. That's when I'm able to start building relationships. When in reality, God was like, man, if only you could see how rich you already were and not be so focused on all this material gain that you're trying to rush and get to. Your feelings are the dictator. Your feelings is what drives you to do what you want to do, to be who you want to be. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because in all actuality, your feelings are meant to inform you, not control you. We think we're actually winning in life when in reality, we're not even living life and we're running from it, not to it. I think we have to get to a place where we actually admit that the very things we're running from are the things we need to embrace in order to enjoy the life we want. Yo, let's talk about it, man. Life on the run. It is your boy Coach Sean in the building, and we're just got another amazing conversation today. And I'm not even going to waste too much time with pleasantries because we got so much to talk about, because living life on the run is exhausting. But it oftentimes presents a picture that it's rewarding, or in a manner that like we're running to our life in some instance, right? And it's really interesting because some of us have been in positions when it comes to living life on the run where we don't even realize it, right? The money is good, the status is good, got a new relationship. Maybe you got married, you got kids, you got a whole family, right? You're like just living life, living like Larry. And oftentimes it is a false imagery to really what's happening behind the scenes, what's really happening internally. And it leads us to greater spaces of struggle. And so today's conversation is just going to be centered on what it looks like to live life on the run. And then, of course, how you can actually start living your life without being on the run, right? And so, of course, I would just be so out of pocket to start this conversation anywhere else but outside of my own experiences, because your boy has been on the run. Why are you running? Like, just on the run. And there's a couple instances where I can easily point this to. Number one, I would definitely point back to my journey in basketball. So if you guys have been on the channel any length of time recently over the last month, you would know I have a video just kind of talking a little bit more about my story, right? My humble beginnings, that one of the things that basically led me to walking out the calling that God has in my life. And it required me to give up basketball. And for the longest time, I was thinking to myself that I was going to go pro, 9-to-5 job. It's not me, having my own business, my own coaching, communicating, teaching for the birds. Bro, I'm trying to go hoop. I'm trying to earn money. I'm trying to earn millions and be able to live my life that way, right? Just kind of be behind the scenes in that aspect. And of course, if you guys can reflect on that story, if you're new, of course, in the pandemic, this is kind of where all the shift happened. At that time, I was playing for I was playing for Creative Young Minds Academy in Louisville, Texas. And this was a professional team. Like, I was on the pathway to being upgraded to the professional team and just really earning my stripes. And so I was really in a space where, give or take a few years, some development going on, I could have went pro for real, maybe overseas to start the journey. And pandemic hit. God shut everything down. And that's kind of when my life pivoted. And so, having to come to this question in the midst of that space where God really confronted me and was really inviting me to lay that down, I remember just in my mind, like, okay, I know if I go here, God is going to give me permission to release it. God is going to make me release it, and I'm going to release it. I know that God is not going to want me to go where I want to go. It was one of those moments where my vision didn't align with his. And so it was a clash that entire time. And of course, as you can see, God won, right? But it was a clash, because it just what he was calling me to didn't match the vision I had for my own life. And it was requiring me to lay down and die to something in order to really choose him. And it was at that moment, of course, with so many other moments I can point to since then, that led me to know that my walk with Jesus is for real. But outside of that moment, right, where I was on the run using basketball, succeeding at basketball, using that as a means to run from what God was initially inviting me to. I mean, there's other, summarizing spaces. I can reflect back to my rejection. I have also a video talking a little bit more in depth about my story of the most impactful rejection up to this point in my life. It's not the only rejection that I've experienced, but it is the most impactful because it was one of those things that I emotionally invested my energy into a lot. And then for the outcome to be what it was at the time, it was pretty hurtful. The first time around that it happened, of course, going back, having conversation. The second time it happens, it's handled a lot differently. Same situation, two different results. One that led me to tears, frustration, anger, and then another that led me to a place of peace, understanding, so much love that just flowed out of my body, out of who I am, for care for that individual, care for the situation, and care about how to move forward. And so with the rejection, though, one of the things that I was on the run about was the truth that there were a lot of things that I wanted out of this that just wasn't there. The truth of me wanting this relationship to be something, and truth be told, I was missing everything. I was wrong. I was wrong about a lot of the things that I was thinking in regards to the relationship I hoped this could become. And I had to be honest about that. I had to be honest, to be just quite frank with you guys. And of course, going back to that video, but for the sake of conversation, I didn't go the lane of saying God told me. Okay. I just think that's manipulative on so many ways. I don't want to get into that conversation. Not to say that everybody who's done it is doing that, of course, right? Like there's some exceptions to the rule where that is the case. But that was never an impression that I had on my heart. Rather, I did go as far as to share prayers. I did go as far as to share different details that I was doing within my prayer life, some things in the scriptures that I was pointing to that kind of led me to feel a specific way of the relationship, and just acknowledging that God was here to some extent. And your boy was wrong in the sense that it wasn't the outcome that I wanted. I was wrong in the sense of I was seeing things that God really wasn't giving permission to. Like it was more so me and less of God. And I had to be honest about that. I had to come clean about that. But I was on the run for that for a while, because I was really afraid of, man, like, I just don't want to come off as that guy that was wrong about the assumptions. Like, how can I be wrong when I'm seeing it in the text? I got scripture to prove it. Lord, what are we talking about? And I just didn't want to be that guy who was seen as wrong in that space. But I had to admit it. And I was on the run from admitting it through my emotions. I was on the run from my emotions and my emotional well-being through work, through overworking, through staying in the gym. I was on the run from emotions that I was trying my hardest to ignore by using the gym as a means to escape. Being a basketball player, it was easy for me to put a ball in my hand, go to the gym and just zone out, just escape life, right? Maybe that's not for you. Maybe yours is retail shopping. Maybe yours is your own work and money. And maybe yours is going to go party, going to go club. I mean, we could think of the more extremes in that arena, but sometimes it's more the quiet things that we do that keeps us from just acknowledging the well of emotions that we're experiencing. And I've been there. I can 1000% relate with you. There's another instance that I would love to point to that I think just is going to tie so much into the conversation that we're going to unpack when we start looking at the text and what scripture really kind of points us to when it comes to what life on the run looks like. How did we even get there? And then how do we maybe recover from that? But I think one of the recent ones outside of maybe the rejection basketball that took place in 2020 and letting that go, I think of the just a year and a half ago, I literally just got off a call with someone that is coming into the community. By the way, if you are somebody who's looking for a safe space to grow and to learn to heal as you're recovering in your journey, hey, listen, click the link in the description below. I definitely got a free community I want you to join as men, free space for men, a safe space for men. And I'll be glad to connect with you there on your journey to healing. But besides the point, this is an amazing thing because I was reflecting on how insecure I was, how much I was indulged in comparison at the simple fact that I felt so behind in life. Being 23, just graduated from college and I have no job. It's been 6 months or so since graduating college. Finding a job has been difficult in this season, right? So I really feel for so many people who are out here job hunting, and yet there's this misconception about you that you're lazy because you haven't landed a job, when really the job market is just difficult. It's really a challenging season for people to find jobs. And so for me, that was kind of where I was at. I didn't really have much prior experience anywhere. I just graduated college. The only thing I had in skill was video editing. And I had proof of that, right? I had proof of concept, the views I got for the internship that I was working with, even my own content that I was working on. But that just didn't seem to break the wall for me to get in and to start earning money, getting paid hourly for this. I mean, even to the point where I got offered a job. I did get offered a job at one point, but looking back at the background of that job, it just was not something I wanted to align my character with. Even though they were offering like 80,000, it was like a laser printing company, right? Like it just all these types of things that were happening at that time for me. And I was wrestling so much, y'all, with insecurity, so much with feeling behind, so much with seeing so many friends and people that I know and love. They're getting their own places, their own living arrangements. They're getting married, long-term relationships. They're starting to have children. Like they're just seemingly excelling in life. And here I am still living with the parents, 23 at the time. And now 24, I'm still living with my parents, by the way, but definitely a huge different outlook because of what I'm about to share with you. And it's a lot that was happening mentally and emotionally for me that made me so frustrated, so angry, so left behind, feeling like I had to do something. Just this rush of anxiety that always rushed through my body. Like, man, you're feeling behind. You need to hurry up, start making some moves so you can get up out of here. I mean, all these timetables that I had set. I was going to get married by this age. I was going to be moved out and have my own space and own car and everything else by this age. And God just used that time to literally bring out of me all of those things that were just so planted deep within my heart, because it was a vision of my life that I had that just didn't match his. And I was just in a place of so many times just frustrating tears, wondering when it was going to happen. Why is it taking so long? And when is enough, honestly, in a lot of ways. And so what helped me begin to deal with that in a more applicable way was, of course, coming to the word, remaining in prayer. Remaining in community was huge. Being surrounded by so many other men and coaches around me who were able to pour into me to help me see, like, yo, you think you're so behind, but yet there are people and men specifically who have what you think you're running after, who still don't have the peace that you have at this current stage of life where you are. And it was something that really turned my whole perspective around. And I was on the run. I was on the run, and saying all of that, I was on the run from obedience. I was on the run from what God was really looking to do through my life, because I was so caught up in trying to get to other places, not even thinking that I was leaving the shadow of obedience, and thinking that if I got there quicker, then that's where the peace is, right? Then that's when I'm able to start enjoying life. Hey, when I get here, that's when I'm able to start dating. That's when I'm able to start building relationships. When in reality, God was like, man, if only you could see how rich you already were and not be so focused on all this material gain that you're trying to rush and get to. And I was on the run. I really was. I was on the run from obedience. I was on the run from my calling. I was on the run from my emotions. I was on the run due to overworking, due to all these different aspects and outlets that I just described to you guys. And I think one of the things that connects all of these moments of me being on the run is my emotional state. And hopefully you got the hint of that as we continue to talk, because when we really think about our emotional well-being, our mental well-being, these things easily connect to the spiritual health that we carry. And it's all good to go around and quote scriptures and even say cliche statements that maybe we've heard other people say that really resonated with us at one point. It's good to go to church, listen to sermons, take notes, all those kinds of things. But man, really walking this thing out every day, Monday through Saturday, even though we have a local gathering every Sunday, it's really, really something that is challenging. It's not easy. And it's, even though you might be in a different season, a different space than you were previously, it still has its own challenges in its own ways. And it's, all of us carry that, whether the challenges are similar or different. It's not meant to be compared. It's just meant to be resonated with, right? Like, you've got your challenges. I've got my challenges. No matter the length and weight of challenges, we all do. And yet we serve the same God who gives us the capacity to endure those challenges, leaning on one another as brothers and sisters in Christ, but also learning how to actually deal with what we're experiencing in a healthy way that allows us to live a healthy life. And so one of those things is dealing with our emotional state. And our emotions can be a crazy place, right? Because maybe you've heard statements like, follow your heart. You've heard statements like, do what your heart says. That's kind of the same thing. That all encourage this aspect that you should just live out your life through your feelings. Your feelings are the dictator. Your feelings is what drives you to do what you want to do, to be who you want to be. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because in all actuality, your feelings are meant to inform you, not control you. And I think when you listen to your emotions, it's like when you plug your phone, maybe you don't plug it in no more because aux cords are extinct, but you do Bluetooth, right? Like when you plug your Bluetooth into, or connect your Bluetooth, your phone to your car, the music you listen to, the podcast you listen to, whatever you're listening to that's connected to your phone, that's then connected to your surround system in your car, it's literally flavoring the car ride, right? With whatever you're listening to. But it's not what's actually taking control of the wheel. Like, it's informing it, it's giving sound waves, you can hear it, but it's not what's actually controlling the wheel. And that's how we ought to move with our emotions. Our emotions are something that we should be present in. Our emotions are something that we should acknowledge and be so sensitive to feel, because it's our body's way of informing us of what we're experiencing. All of that's important, and it's healthy. And it's not something that's supposed to stay in the driver's seat to the point where we allow our emotions to tell us what to do. Instead, we ought to submit our emotions to our logical thinking from a healthy space that then allows us to actually curate a greater sense of spiritual awareness. Because if there's two things that the spiritual foundation really addresses throughout the entirety of the scripture, it's our heart and mind. In fact, when scriptures often talk about the heart, it's talking about your mind, will, and emotion. And so how crazy is it for us to ignore our emotional experiences and emotional well-being at the expense of trying to get somewhere, trying to feel like we're running to life, trying to feel like we're running somewhere, we're trying to get somewhere at a faster rate. But in reality, we are dwindling away. We're falling away. We are destroying ourselves because we are steadily trying to please other people at the expense of our emotional health and well-being. We are trying to keep people in our lives who are choosing to walk away at the expense of at the expense of having a regulated body and being at peace. We are steadily living in a place of worry and anxiety, making that place our home at the expense of really living a peaceful life. And we're clinging to these things, and it's what's driving us crazy. And then we do it for so long, right? Whether it's from places of you growing up, your relationship to your parents, old relationships and friendships, first breakups, like we go so long without addressing these wounds that before we know it, we don't even know where we're at. We don't even know where we're at. And it's so heavy that we think it might be too late to address it. Like, oh my goodness, you know how much I got to go back to dig that up? I would much rather continue moving in dysfunction than to actually dig up what's the root of this dysfunction to actually start living differently. You know, that's why like this idea that, hey, I'm going to throw my 20s and settle down in my 30s, even though that's a dating term, it's often used across the board in life. I don't know how many people I've heard throughout the course of my life who said they feel like they have all the time in the world to get their faith straight, to build a family. Maybe they'll start in their 40s or 50s, and they just assume that they're going to live that long. Or they just assume that when they get there, that all of a sudden there's just this light switch that's available to them where they're just going to be able to download so much wisdom and so much application into their life. And in reality, what you do today is what's programming you for your tomorrow. The life that you live now, the behaviors, the habits, the lack of discipline or the discipline, all these things is what's cultivating and programming you for how you're going to operate in the future. And if we don't get a hold of these things now, it's like, you know, stepping into a home, and a home that you're not in, somebody has been living in this house that you're stepping into for 20 plus years. You step in and all of a sudden you start trying to rearrange stuff. And they're looking at you like, hold on, brother, this ain't your house. What you think you're doing here? And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself booted out. And that's because you are coming into an already established space and you're trying to rearrange things that the people already living there have just grown extremely comfortable to having and being surrounded by. And so anytime that comfortability is challenged, the almost immediate response is offense, pushing away. I don't even want it. I don't care for it. It's disrupting what I have going on. And in a lot of ways, it's causing me to now have to do something different that's going to take more energy, take more time, And I just don't want to do that, because I would just rather lay in this comfortability than actually address what is hurting, address any struggles, address any issues to actually move forward and live better. And so that's oftentimes what we look like when we say those kinds of things. Like, hey, I'm just going to be that guy who just continues to build on this life. And hey, it's working for me. So if it's working for me, then that's okay. But in reality, just because it seems like it's working externally doesn't actually mean it's working. You might be having some external benefits from certain decisions you made, certain wins that you've had, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're winning all the way at life. And I think my evidences of this is just seeing how many people have the status, have all the external gifts, have all the external material gains, and yet they're still depressed. They're still anxious. They still are talking about, things like self-deletion and all those kinds of things, right? And so I just think it's worth considering, that your emotional state, your emotional well-being is an important factor when it comes to actually learning how to embrace the life you want, live life, and no longer run from your life and live life on the run. So when it comes to all that connection from the stories I shared to all of this that we've led up to here, the question then becomes, well, that's cool. I'm hearing you say these things, right? Life on the run, running from your emotions. It doesn't last. It's not helpful. You ignore. And the key to freedom is really embracing your emotions. Okay, cool. I hear you, but like, is there anybody else with greater authority than you that can actually speak to this? I'm glad you asked, because I believe there is. And a lot of what I'm about to bring to you from the Bible is going to be implicit messages within the explicit messages and text that we're going to read. Of course, with the best of my abilities and in curiosities to the text. But I want to bring you two examples that I think is going to highlight and put into frame for you how you are actually presented in the text through these two individuals' experiences. And then the things that they did, or that implicitly is shown to us, that gives us the freedom and availability to actually learn what it means to no longer live life on the run, to no longer allow emotions to control us, to no longer allow ourselves the privilege of running from emotional wounds, traumas, and experiences where we think we're actually winning in life, when in reality, we're not even living life and we're running from it, not to it. Okay. And so the first place that I want to go to is Genesis chapter 16. And Genesis 16 is actually a story, if you guys are familiar with Abraham and his wife Sarai. At this time, they're named Abram and Sarai. And up to this point in Genesis 16, even at the start of Abraham's life, I'm going to continue to refer to him as Abraham, so forgive me. Starting at Genesis 12, right, God calls him to a land. He's like, hey, I need you to leave your homeland. I need you to go and I will show, right? That's going to be a conversation for us to talk about too. But go and I will show. Okay. Go to a land that I will show you. And Abraham takes his steps. He's moving in faith. He ends up taking Lot with him, right? Lot ends up attempting to rescue Lot. I believe it's in chapter 14, after Lot finds himself, in a very peculiar space where he separated from him originally, and then he kind of got jumped in a way by some militant raidings that took place at a camp that he went to, or that he was near, in which Abraham goes and rescues him with his men. Lot still doesn't want to come back with him, and then Abraham is kind of like, well, Lord, feeling like they're going to attack him again. I mean, I'm just replaying a lot of these scriptures throughout Genesis 12 to up to this point, Genesis 16. So Abraham has had a battle with an army. Lot has separated from him. He has made the decision to separate from each other, right? And he had to do that in order to actually go forward into what God had in store for him. And one of the things that God had in store for him up to this point was that he was going to have a son. He has promised this to Abram and his wife Sarai. And now they're kind of in this place where they're anticipating this promise to happen. Okay, God, you said it was going to happen. Year 1 has gone by. Year 2 has gone by. Year 3 has gone by. Year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10. 10 years. 10 years has gone by, and this has not happened. And so they're definitely in a space where they're having to wait. And it's a excruciating wait, to say the least. And so now this takes us to Genesis 16, briefly. Okay, I know I didn't get all the summaries right, but just briefly. It gets us to chapter 16, where we find ourselves with Sarah and Abraham contemplating with one another to basically get some surrogacy going on with Hagar, who's an Egyptian handmaid who they brought up out of Egypt when they initially went down to Egypt, a place that they were not supposed to go. Okay. And so Sarai gets connected. Sarah, Sarai, same person. They get connected and they are like, yo, Hagar, I'm giving this permission because clearly, as she states in the text in Genesis 16, God does not intend on coming through with this. So they're basically coming up with a plan together to move through surrogacy with Hagar. And they go through with it. Okay? They go through with it. And Hagar becomes pregnant as Abraham, by way of Sarah's permission, goes in, has sex with her. And then all of a sudden we start understanding in the text, the very next verse after this has happened, it's explained that Hagar has contempt for Sarah. And she now starts to move as if she's better than her. You know, at this cultural time, women who were married and pregnant and were able to bear children, their status was a lot higher than women who didn't, right? Women who didn't have children, who weren't married, who were widowed, like they were literally the next thing to dirt. Okay. So having children among, with women was a flex in some aspect in this context. Okay. So obviously Hagar's moving that way. And Sarah brings this to Abram's attention, in which Abram replies, hey, this is your servant, so do what you please. So I want to take you now to the verses that we're going to be kind of looking at. Okay. So I just gave to you the summary of verses 1 through 6. So listen to 6 actually in its whole entirety. Abram replied, look, she is your servant, so deal with her as you see fit. Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. So at this point, obviously Sarah has retaliated. She's responded very harshly. We can only intend on understanding how harsh this was. We could assume that there were some words said, some actions, maybe some hands were put on somebody. Who knows, right? Let's just, for exegetical imagination, there was definitely not an alignment here. And Hagar feels extremely tensified, pressured. Her emotions are everywhere. She's very much dysregulated if we went that route of understanding the context of where she's at. Her emotions are all over the place, and it's a very hectic, chaotic scene to be a part of. So much so that Hagar is chased away. She runs off after experiencing so much, perhaps abuse, mistreatment among Sarah by way of Abraham. Right? Abraham gives permission to this in some aspect. So Hagar takes off. We don't really know where Hagar plans on going. We just know she runs, right? Maybe you've been in a situation like that where the emotions are so crazy. You're just like, yo, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm got to get out of here. Okay. I got to get out of here. I don't know what next relationship is going to look like. I don't know what the next marriage is going to look like. I don't know I just got to go. I got to get out of here. So she made the decision to leave. Verse 7 reads this. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness along the road to Shur. The angel said to her, Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from and where are you going? To which she replied, I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai. Okay, she replied. So what's important about these next couple verses is, again, as we've already established, Hagar doesn't really know where she's going. We just know she's leaving the premises and the environment in which she's being emotionally cratered. She's being hurt. And it's in the midst of her running somewhere that she goes far, but clearly not far enough out of the reach of God. Because between her leaving the environment that she was in, where a lot of the emotional pain was happening, And to whatever extent she was looking to run, okay, no matter the distance, God catches her in the middle. Between her going one place, leaving something, and going somewhere else, God meets her in the middle. She's heartbroken. She's hurt. She is very much feeling emotionally wounded at this point and juncture, just again in an exegetical imagination. And the angel of the Lord asks two questions: where you come from and where are you going? And this is such a phenomenal question to be asked to somebody who is frantic, dysfunctional, maybe not dysfunctional, but dysregulated, and is very much so caught up in the moment. It's heavy. It's hurtful. She's wounded. And she's really trying to navigate where to go, but those emotions are so all over the place, she really can't even see. But she's aware enough and in tuned enough to be able to stop and sit down to have a conversation with the angel of the Lord here and entertain the question by giving an answer and saying, I am running from Sarai, my mistress. And I think what this points to is her willingness to just stop running, sit down, and be grounded enough in the present to give an answer to a question that literally changes the entire trajectory of where she thought she was going. With her heartbreak, with her wound, with her emotional dysregularity, she stops, answers, and now, as the story unfolds, the angel of the Lord promises her that she's going to bear a son. He's going to name him Ishmael, all of the characteristics that's going to come with him. But then I want you to skip down to verse 13, where after God, the angel of the Lord, gives all this, it says, thereafter Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, you are the God who sees me. You are the God who sees me. And I think what this implies is that there was a part of her in the midst of that emotional experience that was at its peak when she left Sarai and Abram. She didn't feel seen. She did not feel seen in any kind of way in that experience. And yet, even though no one else saw her, and again, this isn't the point. Now, let me finish this and then I'll come back to it, because I do want to make this prevalent in the text. Again, the implicit messages in it. Let me finish real quick, and then we'll catch up. Okay, just follow along. She isn't seen, but God sees her. The pain, the internal wound and conflict that she's messing with, it's there. God sees her. God speaks directly to her heart in this moment as he's catching her very so tenderly in the middle and deals with her heart so gently that it encourages her to go back as she's going in obedience, right? And of course, throughout this context, what we read is God telling her to go back to submit. Well, wait a minute, bro. You just said that was an abusive space. You just said that was a very, very crazy space to be in for Hagar. Why would God encourage that for her? And although I hear your point, I want to raise something else different to you. That it was less about what she was having to go back and submit to as much as it was her being obedient and trusting God's direction and provision for her at this current juncture in her life. Is she going to trust God with the next steps and next direction, even though the emotional experience she carried was more of a negative one caused by Sarai and Abram? Now, I want to give you some cultural context to this text, because even at this time, of course, there were a lot of women, a lot of people, whether it was polygamous marriages. You got to think about the culture that Abraham is surrounded by in this time. Okay. Yahweh, God of Israel, Elohim, right? Like he hasn't yet established a lot of what we would later read in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers in terms of the law, right? He hasn't really established that yet. So there's a lot of different experiences and religious practices happening around Abraham that is more centered on polyamorous practices, okay? Men married to multiple women. That is all sourced in a polytheistic religion. So these people believe, there's so many people that believe in more than one God in this time. And so the idea of there only being one God, that is far different. That is far different from what's actually being experienced in this space among the other nations. Again, this isn't even the point in argument that Genesis is even trying to make. However, this is helpful to understand the context, because what I would tell you is that the main consensus from this text is that it is simply better to wait on God than it is to try to configure something else for yourself, right? It is so much better for us to just allow ourselves to submit to God's plan and God's direction, no matter how long it takes, knowing that when we're waiting, we're in good company, because it is better to wait on God than to go ahead of God thinking that we're doing something for God or speeding up the process, when in reality, we're only hurting ourselves. Right? Like, that's the main consensus of the text. But to look at the implicit plugins from around this entire perspective, she's going back. Obviously, this is still a part of the context. She's going back to a place where her provisions are going to be met. She's going to be sheltered. She's going to have food. Okay, because she's going to be included into the family picture of Abram and Sarai, while Hagar, her, is pregnant with now Abram's son. And so not only is he encouraging her to go back according to the cultural context, not to necessarily say she should just sit there and be abused, because clearly that isn't something that happens again and again, right? This is that one moment that she did to for efforts of her leaving. Okay. God is sending her back. Obviously, within this context, she's going to be taken care of, right? But he's also giving her the opportunity to choose to trust him. Hey, I've got your next steps here, and I want you to trust me for that direction because I've got you covered. To which Hagar listens and moves in obedience and goes where God instructs her. Okay, that is where we pivot to see you, because a lot of us have looked at this story and we saw it more along the lines of, hey, you don't want to step outside of God's, arrangements and God's alignment. And hey, God says, wait, we need to wait, and we don't need to try to do it our way. That's a beautiful takeaway. I believe that is explicitly in the text. You know what else is also in the text? Putting your feet in the shoes of Hagar and saying, wow, I mean, I may not have necessarily dealt with baby mama drama or baby daddy drama or anything like that, to the extent of like being forced out the house and then having to go back and all those kinds of things. No, I haven't been there. But you know what? I have been through a heartbreak where the emotions were so overwhelming because of the pain I experienced from that moment of the rejection, being told I wasn't wanted, being told that they're not interested in me, being told that I brought no value, being told that I am a waste of space, I'm worthless, being told on the way out that something that doesn't match the identity of what I've always known myself to be. Maybe you went through a breakup and you questioned your worth, you questioned your value, you questioned the legitimacy of who you are and your identity. Maybe it wasn't a rejection or a breakup as much as it was a sexual assault, a traumatic wound, molestation. You went through some extreme pains that definitely left some emotional craters that caused you to question your worth, caused you to question so much about who you are. And so there were patterns that were starting to show up in you that led you to handle it in a specific way. And so what you did was, yes, you ran out of the environment, but you didn't really run from it because it was still something that was attached to your heart. You might have separated yourself out of the physical environment, but that doesn't mean what happened in the physical environment separated you, because it's still something that was wounded enough in your heart and in your soul that kept it cratered, that kept it something that was just nagging and tugging at you repeatedly, that allowed those thoughts to race in your mind, to question your value, that allowed those thoughts to make you feel that you were only good enough for the experiment and experience that you had with somebody who misused you and abused you, who mistreated you, even those who should have loved you, who should have been there for you, who should have protected you, who should have made you feel safe. And yet they weren't there. And they were the ones that led the trauma, that put it in you, that placed it in you. And it sucks. It sucks. And those are the types of things that we've experienced that we can allow ourselves to see through Hagar and say, yo, I've made the same decision where there was an emotional wound that took place and I just took off. I didn't know where I was going, but I just took off. And I ended up somewhere a lot deeper than maybe where Hagar did, but it was all from an emotional response. I didn't know what else to do. No one taught me how to process my emotions. No one taught me how to actually address this stuff. So I just ran, and I've been running. And now when I sit down and I think about it, and I actually look at what Hagar did and I choose to apply it myself, I'm like, yo, man, where did I come from and where am I going? And that's the question I want to raise to you. Where all this running, all this all these mechanisms you've used to escape from your emotions. You've turned to the masturbation, you've turned to the pornography, you've turned to the sex to feel anything different than the emotional experiences you've had. You've turned to overworking, you've turned to the money, you've turned to getting your status up, you've turned to OnlyFans, you've turned to all these different things. You've even gotten married at the expense of escaping an emotional wound. You got in a whole full-blown long-term relationship to escape from a wound, to erase it, to act like it never happened. Well, if I get with this person, then you know what? I can just forget all about it. I have 2 years down the line, hey, we won't even think about it, right? You don't even like them. You just know that this is somebody that you feel comfortable enough to get over the past relationship with, not somebody you actually want to build a life with. Like, there are so many decisions that we will make from an emotional space that's so chaotic, so erotic, and it leads us to so many places. And what I'm encouraging us to do from this text is to replicate what Hagar did. And even though the Holy Spirit, the angel of the Lord, is said to have found her, she sits down long enough to not just entertain the question, but to listen to what God has to say for next steps on where to go. And so she's on the run, and her response is to sit down, entertain the question of where you're going, where you're coming from, and where you're going. That then leads her to change direction, go back in obedience to God. The key thing is being obedient to God in the next steps and direction that he had for her. So the question that we're parked at here is, where are you coming from and where are you going? That's really the biggest thing. And even in the midst of answering this question, what God makes room for is your emotional state of mind. No matter how much you feel about it, good, bad, or indifferent, God creates space for you to get that off your chest and to allow that to be heard and seen. There's a reason why Hagar says, "You're the God who sees me." He didn't just give her flippant thoughts. He didn't just randomly answer her. No, he spoke directly to the things that she was dealing with internally. He actually connected with her and saw her where she was. And that's exactly what God offers to you, not just from a direct personal relationship to him, but also through community. Group of people who are safe, who come together and say, "Man, I see you. I hear you." And God offers healing through such words, such spaces, creating such safety for you to actually no longer be in a space where you're living life on the run. Because it gets tiring, it gets exhausting. And if we stop, take a breath, just stop. All the busyness, stop. All the excess relationships, stop. All the going out, just stop. Sit in for a night. You know what I'm saying? Sit in for a night before you get out of your bedroom. You know what I'm saying? Like, take a minute, take some deep breaths, ground yourself in the present. All this hurrying that we're operating in, all this wondering what's next and how am I going to get this and how am I going to get that, and running on the go. And we are so used to being on the go that we've convinced ourselves that I can't possibly carve out 10 minutes for God. I can't possibly carve out a few minutes to just sit in silence. But in reality, we're using that to rationalize the idea that we just don't really want to sit with our emotions because there's too much to start. And perhaps that's where you're at. And my encouragement is that when you start with just simply sitting with him, even as uncomfortable as it might be, and maybe even some spaces where you don't even know what to say, we're actually putting ourselves in position to get our peace back. Because that's ultimately what God desires for you, is not for you to live a life on the run, but for you to actually live a life at rest. Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." God gives us rest. And rest does not equate to living life on the run. And so in order for you to get that rest, you've got to be willing to sit down and consider some things, reflect on some things. Therapy might be something, coaching, counseling, all that, communities. Yes, because that is how we're going to get into a healthy space, by sitting down, reflecting, and sitting with what we've experienced. acknowledging it, being honest about what we feel, being honest about, bro, I'm telling you, that is how we got to do it. And Hagar lays out the blueprint by simply engaging with conversation with God and stopping in the midst of her running to give her ear to what God has to say. But that's not all, because then we go to Jonah. And Jonah is a very interesting character there. And I actually want to share a quote with you from a pastor and a speaker by the name of Tim Mackey, who actually has an amazing series called Amazing Jonah, where he just basically goes into so much detail in pulling this text out and into real life, man, and making it so applicable and so beautiful. But this is what he says in the part 1 message of his thoughts and sermon. He says this: here's this very religious man who, when it comes to it, here's a core issue where his vision of his life is being challenged, and he's booking it to Tarshish. And the sad irony is that he thinks he's running for his life. He thinks God is ruining his party. And the tragedy is that he's running from life. And this is exactly where I got the whole terminology running to life, running from life. Tim Mackey just gave amazing language for it, because it's absolutely true. Like, when I think about the book of Jonah, I've had to actually sit back, read it, and reflect on it myself, because I see myself in the midst of it. And I think that's the whole purpose of the book. Like, as open-ended as it is, it's an opportunity for us to see ourselves. And Jonah is so much more than just a guy who got swallowed up by a whale, as VeggieTales will put it to us, right? Like, the whale is only mentioned in a couple verses in the entirety of the book. Jonah is a man who is a prophet in the land, who is supposed to be, by his name, his title, he's by even the meaning of his name. Like, it's supposed to be, he's supposed to be the godliest man in the land, it seemed like, but yet he's the furthest. Yeah, he's the furthest. And when it comes to reading the book of Jonah, obviously, when we first walk into the book, right, we read that the son of Amittai, who's Jonah, God speaks directly to him, and he says, go to Nineveh and preach this message of repentance. And we read that Jonah books it, right? Like, Jonah flees. He hears it. That's a tall glass of no, and I'm going to just go. Okay. Kind of seemed like relatable to what I did. God's like, hey, I want you to go do this. And because it just didn't match what I wanted, I was like, yeah, that's a tall glass of no, because I got these Kobe's and I don't know what you want, but I'm going to go put these on and go to the gym. Even though that's not what Jonah did, that's what I did. And I can relate to Jonah, and maybe you can too, because you can probably think of some moments where God has invited you into some spaces, but you've been like, yeah, no, that just doesn't suit what I want for my life. But let's continue, because Jonah doesn't just go like across the street. Jonah goes all the way on the way opposite end of where he's supposed to go. And, Tim Mackey also labels it as what we would label as Timbuktu, right? Like, that's where Jonah goes. And he escapes. He's running from it. And this whole time he thinks he's running for his life. And the reasons why he thinks this is actually revealed in Jonah chapter 4, because Jonah chapter 4 actually gives us the reason why he runs. Because we often would look at the first chapter and we say, oh, Jonah ran because he was told he was supposed to do something and he didn't want to do it. But let's look a little deeper, because this actually gives us really good understanding as to why he does it. Jonah 4 reads this, starting at verse 1. This change of plans greatly upset Jonah. Of course, in the prior context, God has, Jonah preached the message. The whole city is saved. And Jonah's just not with it at all. Like, Jonah is pissed. This change of plans greatly upset Jonah, and he became very angry. So he complained to the Lord about it. Didn't I say before I left home that you would do this, Lord? That is why I ran away to Tarshish. I knew that you are a merciful and compassionate God, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love. You are eager to turn back from destroying people. Just kill me now, Lord. I'd rather be dead than alive if what I predicted will not happen. And this entire exchange that he shares shows us that his reason for running was actually because of how he felt towards Nineveh. Well, who's Nineveh? Nineveh is the capital of Babylon. Babylon Empire at this time is the most dangerous, most evil, most nastiest, most wicked, area of the world. Like, this is the Assyrian Empire was one thing. The Babylonian Empire was another thing. It was nasty work. And so bad that they actually had literal spears with strong pointy tips, and they had like dead bodies hanging on them as they surrounded the body. Like you talk about horrific. I'm pretty sure if I was in Jonah's shoes, I probably would have responded the same way. I have evidence of this because I've ran from God too, and what God was ultimately wanting to do through my life in different seasons. But what's so interesting about all of this, man, is we could only imagine based on how Jonah responds that he has a lot of bitterness and anger towards Nineveh, a lot of hatred, give or take, a lot of disgruntled feelings, a lot of disdain towards Nineveh. So much so that he's like, yo, they don't deserve your mercy, Lord. You're talking about wanting to give them love and kindness and compassionate. Lord, they don't deserve it. Look at what they're doing. Look at what they've done. Look at what, like, why? Why are we doing this? And it's a big part of why he just can't release his vision for God's vision. Because there's a lot of wrapped up emotional experiences he's having that's keeping him tied to what he would ultimately wish for, which is that they would just all get smited, dead in, no longer existing. And what I find so interesting in this text implicitly, in this specific text of Jonah chapter 4, outside of him running, outside of him just fleeing, is that God made room for Jonah's emotions. No matter how negative they were, unsettling they were, no matter how right or wrong Jonah was. Because if you keep reading Jonah chapter 4, God actually gives a reply to him in a manner that was supposed to help Jonah see, like, you're in the wrong about this. You don't have the same heart to see these people saved as I do, right? Like, yeah, it just, you don't really have the right heart posture about this, because you saw things the way I did. If you really wanted to pursue after my heart and connect with me in this way and partner with me in this, you would see why I'm doing this. But like, you're so caught up in your own emotional affairs that it's a struggle to see, but God still made room for that. And I think it's so amazing that despite how right or wrong Jonah could have been in this moment, God still let him get it off. Like, Lord, I knew you do this. He's upset at God. He's upset with God at the fact that this is happening opposite to what he envisioned. And maybe that's an accurate description of where some of you guys are. You know, like, you've been carrying a lot of anger and resentment, not just towards other people, but towards God. Because God, how could you allow this to happen to me? How could you allow such behaviors to really, really take hold of me like this? Like, I thought you loved me. I thought you cared for me. I really, really thought that you had my back. God, why are you calling me to forgive this person? Do you not see what they did to me? And you're telling me to let this go? Let what go? Ninja? What are we talking about? Maybe that's where you're at. There's just a lot of frustration, a lot of emotions that still have to be unpacked from things that took place. And what's crazy is we as believers really have a bad habit of holding tension. Not a bad habit. We have a bad habit of not holding tension. Please. All right. So I'm not sounding like a broken engine here. We have a bad habit of not holding tension because a lot of us hold this perspective that, well, if God's calling me to forgive this person, then that must mean that I have to be buddy-buddy with this person, reconcile with this person. Everything has to be okay. I have to act like nothing's wrong in order to actually forgive, when in reality, God never required us to do that. No, in fact, I would actually argue that a part of the process of forgiveness isn't that we forget it happened, but that we're able to move forward from it. I think this is really what Paul speaks about when he says, I've forgotten those things which are behind me and I'm pressing towards the prize of the high calling. It's not to say that he literally forgets those images. It's just that I'm choosing to move forward. I'm choosing to release this person of a debt I feel they owe me due to what they did to me. And I'm willingly allowing myself to move forward, because oftentimes your healing doesn't start until you forgive. We can do everything else, but if we don't actually forgive and release this person, we can't really get the healing we need. And I just connect that to what Jonah does, because Jonah has a lot of emotions that need to be unpacked. And how this text leaves off is so interesting, because it's not really a closed session. It's not really something that has a total complete ending, a whole wrapping ending. Because I want you to listen to this. I'm gonna read the rest of this chapter, and hopefully you're gonna follow along, because this starts at verse 4, when the Lord replied, "Is it right for you to be angry about this?" It's interesting how God asks questions, isn't it? Then Jonah went out to the east side of the city and made a shelter to sit under, as he waited to see what would happen to the city. He's waiting. He's hoping God does not answer this. He's hoping fire and brimstone. He might be expecting a Sodom and Gomorrah part 2, right? And the Lord God arranged for a leafy plant to grow there, and soon it spread its broad leaves over Jonah's head, shading him from the sun. This eased his discomfort, and Jonah was very grateful for the plant. But God also arranged for a worm. The next morning at dawn, the worm ate through the stem of the plant so that it withered away. And as the sun grew hot, God arranged for a scorching east wind to blow on Jonah. The sun beat down on his head until he grew faint and wished to die. "Death is certainly better than living like this," he exclaimed. Then God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry because the plant died?" "Yes," Jonah retorted, "even angry enough to die." Then the Lord said, "You feel sorry about the plant, though you did nothing to put it there. It came quickly and died quickly. But Nineveh has more than 120,000 people living in spiritual darkness, not to mention all the animals. Shouldn't I feel sorry for such a great city?" And that's where the book ends. And it's like an open-ended that gives us an opportunity to almost do what Jonah doesn't seem to do in the moment, and that's embrace the truth that God drops on us in the midst of our grief, in the midst of our unsettledness, in the midst of our anger, in the midst of our emotional experience. Because one thing about healing is that we have to actually make room for truth. We can't just feel our feelings all day and not go anywhere. That doesn't really help us as much. Is there room for that? Absolutely. And there's truth that needs to be said and digested in order for us to actually move forward. And that's what God does for Jonah. I mean, Jonah here is like, if you really want to picture, it's almost like a 2-year-old kicking his feet. But that's oftentimes what we look like. I mean, I don't even throw shade at Jonah, because I was there. I've been there. I am Jonah in a lot of ways, more so than not. And the simple fact that there's something that I want that doesn't align with what God wants, and so I have to make a decision. And sometimes that decision is uncomfortable, because it causes me to drop my ego. It causes me to drop my pride. It causes me to drop the timetables. It causes me to drop something in order to really receive what God has for me. And I think the question that we actually have to rest in is that, man, do we really believe that what God has for us is actually best for us? And I think that also connects to whether or not we really believe that God's character is who he says he is, that he's all knowing, he's all powerful, he's all loving, he is love, and that God is simply incapable of misleading us, misguiding us, mistreating us, abandoning us. Like, he's incapable of lying to us, betraying us. He's incapable of these types of things that, if we're being honest, throughout our human experience, we've encountered through other people. And so it's built up these screens. It's built up these mental walls that in which we've actually started to see life through the lens of our brokenness. So it's tinted our eyes. You know, like if you take a tint of a window, right? Like, you see a lot clearer on the outside, but it's harder to see in the inside. And the tint is designed for you to have the vision, or for you to see what's going on, but for others not to see what's going on inside wherever the tint is, right? And it's like, well, the tints come in different shades, and it's all definitely distorting the perspective that we have on the outside world. And that's a lot of what our pain has done. It's distorted a lot of what we've seen, what we see as the outside world, because we had moments where we didn't feel safe. We had moments where we didn't feel protected. We had moments where we felt ignored, not seen, not heard, not valued. We had moments where we were extremely abandoned, abused, mistreated by those who were supposed to love us. And I just want to offer this to you as we're really trying to digest what it looks like to not live life on the run. I think we have to get to a place where we actually admit that the very things we're running from are the things we need to embrace in order to enjoy the life we want. And instead of being on the run and living life on the run, oftentimes what God is calling us into is a space where we are invited to trust him, trust his character, and be willing to depend on his process and timing. And while we're depending on that, we're actually still getting the healing we need because we haven't been forgotten about that entire process. And I think what we learned from Jonah, I'm actually going to pull up a few key notes here because I think this is really important as we're unpacking this. Okay. I think there's a few things that we learned from Jonah. Okay. That one, there could be so much that's pent up inside of you that God is actually trying to push you to let go. And your body is informing you that this stuff needs to be let go. Isn't it amazing how God designs the body? Our emotional awareness and emotional stability, our nervous system, everything. Like God designed our body to be something that we are so present in that we don't ignore its signals. We don't ignore its information, but we actually lean into it as a means of understanding how to operate. But there's some things, especially when it comes to your nervous system being so dysregulated, your nervous system being so all over the place, filled with anxiety, filled with worry, filled with stress, all of this different emotion that you might experience that pushes you to all these different external things as a means of validation, as a means of importance, as a means of feeling anything than what you're currently feeling, because it's just uncomfortable to sit with your emotions. It's uncomfortable to sit with your own thoughts. So I just rather go get a drink. I'd rather go sex. I'd rather go to pornography. I'd rather masturbate. I'd rather do all these different things. There's so much pent up inside of you that if we would just pause long enough, we would actually learn that God is inviting us to let it go. And even though there's a part of you that knows that God is inviting you into it, and you possibly know the end result of what God is even asking you to do, kind of like Jonah, right? Jonah didn't want to go because he knew God would be merciful and loving. And maybe you don't want to do it because you know if you do, God is actually might lead you to go and live a different life, to let go of the anger that you feel so justified to hang on to. Like, you know that if you went to God about it, God's going to tell you to drop it and you don't want to drop it. God is going to tell you to let it go and you don't want to let it go. Right? And you feel justified in making other people pay for what it was done to you or what was done to the people you love. And the tough part is that letting go isn't a part of the vision we have for our life. And yet it's to our loss and not our gain. And it's when we grow closer to Christ that we grow closer to letting go of our own vision and partner with Christ on the best vision that cultivates the greatest impact. And so what I want to help you see is that partnering with God isn't so much about you losing as much as it is about you winning. Like, I know that there's a lot that you feel you have to let go of in order to live, and it's a process. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon type of deal, right? Like, I know that there's a lot you're thinking to yourself that I've got to actually let go and I've got to address. But there might be some hesitancy in that process because you aren't really too sure what you might think about God in the midst of doing it. You've been told all your life that you have to forgive people and forget, in the sense that you've interpreted to mean that you don't even think about it anymore. It isn't something that even happened. You erase it as if it never happened. Maybe you've been told all your life that, like, that reconciliation is required. Maybe you've been told a lot in your life that in efforts of forgiving somebody that means everything is okay, everything's cool, everything's water under the bridge. Maybe you've been told that, man, I just struggle. I just really struggle to really, really trust God here, man, because I don't know if he's actually going to exact vengeance on this person like I imagine him to, or like I imagine this person should. I imagine this job should. Like, I don't know if I can really trust that. And I want to be a voice of reason to you and just encourage you that if we really believe that God has all authority and that God is the final authority, that God is outside of time, and that God really has the best interest for us, why wouldn't we trust him here? Why wouldn't we trust that God actually has our back and actually wants to see us in a healthy state of mind, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually? And if God is calling me to let this go, isn't it possible that one of the things that I could think about that would actually encourage me to let it go is because I see him as my father? I see him as somebody who actually wants the best for me and is incapable of misleading me and betraying me, playing jokes with me, playing tricks on me, saying one thing but doing another. And I think what I don't want is for your experiences with other people to rob you of a legitimate experience with your father, your heavenly father, that is, that we share. And I think some of that process really looks like us just embracing what we feel, no longer allowing people to tell us how we should feel, but just simply being in a space where we can acknowledge, bro, even though this may not be how I should feel, I'm not even worried about the shoulds. This is just how I feel. And allowing God to be on the receiving end of some of the messier prayers that we have. God, I am really upset that this is happening. I'm really upset that you're telling me to let go of this. I'm really, really heartbroken at the fact that you allowed that relationship to no longer be. I'm really upset that you allowed them to walk out of my life after all that I thought you told me, and it's not the case. I'm really, really not okay. Tears and all. Why would you do this? Why would you allow this? Like, this is the tension and the ugly part about what it looks like to have a relationship with God. And the simple fact that he gives us the space to feel what we feel and it doesn't hurt the relationship. Like, you don't have to worry about God not coming back to sit with you after you cry your tears. You don't have to worry about thinking you did too much, you said too much, and that God's just not going to come back and sit with you the next morning, the next day, because of all that you spilled out in talking with him as your emotions hit overflow and your tear ducts activated. God's not petty like that. People might be petty like that, but God's not petty like that, because God has the capacity to make room for what you feel. And so I just really want to give you a few thoughts here as we've just looked at these couple of stories and looking at all of these different emotional experiences that both these individuals have that seem similar. You know, Hagar might be more emotionally distraught in the sense of feeling abandoned, pushed away, not wanted, unwanted. Maybe for Jonah, right? He's really angry and frustrated that people who he feels that don't deserve God's mercy and salvation, God obviously wants to give it and he can't align himself there, right? So you have two parts to Jonah where there's a vision he has that doesn't align with the vision God has. And then there's something that Jonah doesn't feel the people that are in Nineveh deserve that God is wanting to give. And he just can't align with that, right? How he feels about the people of Nineveh is a very negative taste in his mouth, very negative taste. And it's what's keeping him from really walking with God, because God, how could you? Right? He feels justified for carrying that. And I think with the applications, I think it's fair to also transition to hopefully helping you see that we're much like Hagar and Jonah. We're definitely those people that find ourselves on the run. Emotionally, mentally, we're just trying our best to really overlook, abandon wounds and pains that we've experienced as a means of thinking that if we achieve something externally, it's what's actually going to help us get the peace we're striving for. We just think like maybe Jonah, we're running for our life. We're running for our life. We're running for it. I'm gunning it. I'm not looking back. I'm over it. I'm done. I'm moving on. We've convinced ourselves that this person never mattered. We've convinced ourselves that we never really wanted anything out of it. But in reality, we're lying to ourselves, because if we were just honest for a second, we would admit that Gosh, Lord, that was a relationship I really wanted. Lord, that was a person that I really thought to myself I could actually do life with forever. Lord, I really wanted that opportunity, and it sucks that I didn't get it. Lord, you really telling me and leaning and helping me lean into a space to forgive that person. And Lord, it's just such a fight because I just can't get over what they did to me. I can't get over the betrayal. And I'm rehearsing it over and over, and it's taking my peace. And I'm just so tired of people always getting the upper hand on me, mistreating me, abandoning me, and I don't even know what to do. And I think a few things that God wants to offer through these texts that I hope I want to portray to you appropriately is, number one, that he holds space and he makes room for what you feel. And God does not need to overlook your emotional state in order to heal you. He actually embraces it. So let him have it. Pour it all out. Because you need to begin putting words to what you feel so you don't begin behaving unseemly that leads you to greater danger. Words and actions. What doesn't come up and out of your mouth through words will come up and out of your body through actions. And if you miss it, it will be the very thing that destroys you. It's not the very thing that will help you. So some of us just need to get into a space where we can just emotionally express where we are, not where we are projecting ourselves to be, not what we're hoping to be, not giving somebody excuse for their reasons. Oh, I can intellectualize and understand why they did it because they never had a dad. They never had a parent. They never had this. They never had that. I mean, look at the life they're living. I get it. I understand it. But we can easily get into a place where we dismiss ourselves in the process of trying to make room for somebody else. When in reality, sometimes what we just need is, yeah, I get that, and I'm hurt. What they did to me was not right. We can acknowledge the negative experience and integrate that into our reality by acknowledging that this happened, being honest about how we feel as a response to it happening. And how do we do that? Well, we first just got to be honest. We got to get into a place where we got to stop running. We got to put our foot in the dirt. We got to stop. Just take a second. Take a breath. What am I feeling right now? And your moments of gratitude and getting your day off right, man, Lord, okay, what am I feeling right now? What are some emotions? Where's the tension in my body really kind of culminating as I ground myself and I'm feeling from the toes to the top of my head and I'm allowing myself to be grounded in the present? What am I feeling right now? What are my emotions right now? What do I feel? I feel uneasy. I feel a lot of the pain in my chest, in my heart. I want you to just start getting used to being grounded and allowing yourself to just be curious enough. Instead of looking at your emotions as a threat to your survival, as a threat to your life. They're not a threat. Your thoughts are not a threat to you living. It's what's actually inviting you to learn how to live. And it's through embracing your thoughts and embracing your emotions. And they're there to give you your freedom back. And yet we've just been ignoring it because we're afraid to revisit things, thinking it's what's going to hinder us, not help us. But God makes room for that. And so that's the first thing I really want to tell you is that I think what we need to do is just start being honest. Hey, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm feeling. Then I need you to start verbalizing these things. Is it in a handwritten journal? It can be. Is it in an audio journal? Hey, voice memo, bro, this stuff is stacked. Absolutely, it can be. It can be. Is it in community when you're talking to other people, other believers, people who you can trust? Absolutely. And here's the beautiful thing about this entire conversation that we're having, because sometimes we feel we have to be on the run for survival because we can't trust anybody. And I want to sprinkle some truth in this conversation, some more truth rather, because even though you've been betrayed by some people, and I can understand how that can easily become a narrative you create, not everybody's out to get you. One, everybody don't know you like that. B, not everybody has the same heart as the people who have betrayed you. And so what we're doing is we're not able to integrate our negative experiences into our realities. So we're starting to convince ourselves that what has happened will always be, or we're convincing ourselves that what happened is who we are. And what we have to do is we have to start shifting our perspective to saying, yes, this happened, and this is how I'm getting through it. Yes, this happened, and I'm in present day. And present day, today, nobody is doing to me what I'm remembering was done to me in the past. Yeah, I just need to process that, right? I just need to really be present with that and not run from it. And so I don't want you to feel like you have to be on the run because there's nobody you can trust. You want to know how you can perhaps gain some of that trust is by giving a little bit at a time to people. Because if we're being honest, some of us, man, some of that vulnerability is honestly on us because we gave too much too soon. I mean, we are in a culture and in a generation where we all get on social media as a means to be seen. And so as a result, we might tend to overshare and it hurts us. And then we go back and we wonder, well, dang, I can't find nobody that actually I can trust and I can't trust nobody. No, it's not that. It's just that your vulnerability scared them away, which should actually help you see that they didn't have the capacity to contain what you shared. So they mishandled you. And what we learn from that is that we're able to put ourselves in positions to give a little at a time, to see how they respond to our story. How do they respond to us? Do they make room for us? Do they make space for us? And if that's the case, then I'm able to move forward. But if not, I know what I have. And guess what? What I shared with you wasn't something so detrimental to me. It was something I was comfortable with you knowing. And people have to get to a place where they earn your vulnerability. You don't just automatically give it, because your vulnerability is a gift. And in the wrong hands will be misused against you. And I think some of the ways that we're able to determine, okay, well, wait, because then this isn't the conversations, right? Okay, well, wait, what if I'm dealing with a narcissist? What if I'm dealing with a gaslighter? What if I'm dealing with a manipulator? All these high key words that we use all the time, right? Well, I think one of the biggest ways to learn between all of them is when you're patient enough. Sometimes we just buy into what people show us on the first date, not in the first month or two of knowing them. Because I promise you, the longer you're observant and you don't allow your emotions to lead, but you allow what you've learned, you allow your healed mental state to lead your emotions, you're not going to be so quick to buy into what somebody says surfacely without seeing some behaviors aligned with it. So then we're giving it time. Time is an amazing gift and is necessary in such processes because it just gives you time to observe. Okay, I hear what you're saying, but I'm looking at your behaviors too, and I'm looking at the consistencies or the lack thereof. And this is actually what's informing me of whether or not I can actually take you at your word versus what you're telling me. And so sometimes all we have to do is just wait it out. Sometimes what we have to do is not allow ourselves to cling so close to this person so soon, but we have to say, hey, I need the space to be able to observe what's actually happening here. So I don't put myself in position to be love bombed, or I don't put myself in position to be manipulated so easily. And in the process of that, as you're sharing, as you're having conversation, as you're opening up, you give a little at a time and see how they respond. Observe that. And you'll know exactly what you have. But a lot of us have just been moving with these wounds, and we portray it and project it onto everybody, when in reality, we just have to go and press in and ask ourselves, man, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? And then just be in the present with that. Because sometimes all we need to do is just have a space to let those emotions go. Because keeping them in is what's actually causing us to behave unseemly among other people. And it's hurting, not helping. Okay. So that's the first thing. We just got to be honest. We got to put words to what we feel, right? We really do. And that comes through with community, that comes through coaching, counseling, that comes through people you trust, having them earn their vulnerability. Of course, we kind of briefly talked about putting words to what we feel through journaling, audio journaling, right? Where's the tension in your body? What happened and what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? Another thing is solitude, man. We got to get into a place where we're willing to just be in silence. That's a huge thing. And again, no matter how uncomfortable it is, we've seen how far running has gotten us, and it's really gotten us nowhere. So the next best thing is to give ourselves an opportunity to embrace silence and allow the emotions to come as they will. They're like waves, man. You just, as waves crashing like cars, like cars flying across the highway, across the road. That's exactly a representation of our thoughts and how fast they come. And it's the ones that we cling to and we grab and we lock in on are the ones that we dwell on that then produce different types of emotions in our bodies. And so it's not to say that we just need to ignore everything, but there are just some thoughts that come in, with those intrusive thoughts that people be experiencing. Everybody at some point, even I myself have experienced intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts are a real thing. And I think one thing that I've learned to be able to deal with them in my own process is just recognizing that I'm not my thoughts. That's number one. And then how I recognize I'm not my thoughts is by actually seeing the literal in real time action that I have when I can notice that there's some thoughts that have come across my mind and I've just let them go. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I thought that. Or, oh, that's interesting. And then there's some thoughts that I've actually intentionally grabbed. And I dwelled on it. And the reason and how I know I dwelled on it was because I continued to put words to it. I continued to fuel it. And so I think one of the things that's really helpful is when we're able to say, yo, that's an interesting thought, and keep it moving. We actually have the power to let it go and not hold on and cling to everything. And so I think solitude helps us to grow into that practice of being able to see that and not allow it to drive us crazy. And I think the more that we are in that space of solitude, silence, carving that time out in our day, the more that we're allowing our bodies to catch up. Because I want to be honest too, man, like there's a lot of applications that we're giving here throughout this entire conversation that seems foreign, and that's okay. I don't want you to feel like you have to get it all together and get it all down packed right now, because truth is, maybe you're not used to being present in your emotions. You're used to going to fill it out and doing all these other kinds of things. And listen, you're not alone in that. And so you're not supposed to come out here and be and bat 1,000 with this. Nah, not at all. Not at all. What we need to do is be willing to just give ourselves time to get acclimated to this stuff. This is new. And so because it's new, your emotions are going to be everywhere. Giving it a first try, you're going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel like a stress on the body. And it's a good kind because we see the end result. We understand the bigger picture for the end result. It's for us to actually become healthy again and get you back. Okay. So be in that process, solitude, journaling. I got to throw in prayer and Bible reading, y'all. Like I'm telling you, when I went through my rejection, when I went through crushing experiences, it was prayer and this Bible, y'all. It was getting into the presence of God, because I could not really hear what God was trying to say if I wasn't willing to get in his presence among community and in my own private time with him. I mean, otherwise, red pill was loud in my ear, because that's all that's on the internet. People who are talking crazy and giving you the worst advice are out here perpetuating and repeating horrible content. I couldn't give my room to that. I couldn't give my ear to the sad music that was keeping me in the heartbreak, instead of actually giving me a profound perspective on it and seeing my pain through the lens of purpose. And some of us have just been rehearsing stuff that God has been long said ain't coming back. And we're no longer weeping about the person that has left. We're weeping about what they could do for us. Yeah, I'm going to let that sit in for a second. Oh, snap. Yeah, no, breathe through it. That was deep. And so we got to get into a place where we're rehearsing something healthier and something more nourishing for our bodies. Right? I think that's helpful. And I think, how else are you going to do that when you don't get into his presence? God wants to hear from you. God wants your messy prayers. God wants you to just not even come in and give prefaces to everything you're saying. He just needs your authentic self. That's all he wants. Let him handle the rest. Let him deal with your heart the rest. You be open to what God is going to say and do in that space, even if it's just place for containment. Because that's exactly how God operates. He makes room for our emotions. And sometimes we need to actually just be willing to embrace our emotions and team and partner with our emotions, as opposed to going against them. We just need to partner with them, because it's actually the key to our freedom. Like, hey, I'm feeling angry, but I'm going to partner with this anger, not as a means to partner with this anger and do something negative with this anger, but I want to partner with it because I actually want to understand it. I want to sit down with it. Hey, anger, you're here again. That's interesting. What are you angry for, man? What's up? Speak kindly to yourself. Don't buy into the whole negative self-image narrative that you've bought into that you thought was necessary for you to do better. Like, oh, I'm just so dumb. I'm so stupid. No. No. We just need to speak kindly to ourselves. Yeah, man, I get it. I get why you're angry. I get why you feel that way. I can understand that. What else are you feeling? Continuing to move in curiosity. Like, you're literally having a conversation with your emotions. I want you to get to such a place where you're willing to do that, because it's going to draw out of you what's needed for you to become regulated and not be walking around like a ticking time bomb. Because the one thing that Jonah and Hagar had the privilege of doing in the midst of their running in the Old Testament, in these two texts that we just read, was they had an opportunity to regulate their body by putting words to what they were feeling and knowing what they were doing. They were aware enough to acknowledge what they were doing. They were aware enough to be in the presence of God, specifically to Jonah, and God's just letting it go. He's letting him have it. He's letting him have it. And I think that's a lesson for us, to be able to get into the presence of God and not expect him to shut us down and shut us away. No, God makes room for that. And he knows your heart to know how long it takes for you to deal with something. And he's gracious enough to give you the permission to do it. You have the permission to grieve. Yeah. You have the permission to grieve. You know, David and Jonathan are amazing friends in the text. And towards the end of 1 Samuel, when we read that David is being chased away from Saul and Jonathan gives him the heads up, we read in 1 Samuel that David breaks down in tears from Jonathan approaching him as they embrace one another one more time before David has to separate. And he cries his heart out, because in a lot of ways, David understands that he will not be able to embrace this friend of his and Jonathan in the same manner moving forward. Things are not going to be the same once I get up and turn around and go the other way. And in that moment of him weeping and grieving, he's grieving so he can leave it properly. He falls to his knees. He's so broken. And yet it wasn't after much of that grieving that he then stands up and they go on. And that's the means to grieving, not so that you live there, but so that you actually are able to release what's been kept inside of you. That's going to actually give you permission to move forward. So some of us just need a good cry. You might need a good hug, but it's necessary, fam. It's necessary. And God makes room for that. And the right community and right people make room for that. And the right friend group and people that you're around will never make you feel embarrassed or ashamed for having to let go of some tears in order to get your healing. Now, real friends also won't let you cry all day, every day. That too. And that doesn't mean that you don't have those moments where you just need to let it go. Because I think real friends make room for that too. How about some breathing exercises? Those are really good too. So there's some breathing techniques. I really like the technique of just being able to, slowly breathe in, allow the air to slowly fill your lungs, okay, to capacity. Take some really good deep breaths, let it out real slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, count to 10. Those are really helpful. And then of course you do that after a few minutes. You don't necessarily have to do it consistently for a few minutes. Do like 60 seconds or something like that. Count to 10 of those deep breaths and then do your regular breathing. And then to be able to focus in on the present, focus in on your breath, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, as it's breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, or in and out of the nose, right? You inhale and exhale. You count the inhales and exhales to 10 and you start back over. That just helps you be present in the moment. I think that's a good exercise to just be able to ground. And then this is also something that's just allowing you to really get in tune with the emotions you're experiencing in the moment, right? So as something comes up, maybe there's a flutter in your chest, there's some anxiety that's taking place, there's some nervousness that starts happening as your mind starts thinking of things you have to do for the day, right? You just acknowledge that, right? Oh, I feel nervous. That's interesting. What am I feeling nervous about? Oh, that's right, because I got that presentation. Yeah, well, I think I'm going to do okay. I've done enough studying. I've done a lot of good things for this for the preparation of this. So I think I'm going to be okay, right? And then I'm going to center back onto the moment. I'm going to center back onto the present time. I'm going to center back on to what's in front of me and what I'm doing currently, counting my breaths, right? This is just going to help you just become grounded, because a lot of the time what we're on the run from our emotions is we're just unable to be grounded, and it's necessary. Okay. Last two things. Gratitude. Y'all, sometimes it's just a gratitude problem, man. We're focused so much on what we don't have. We're focused on so much of where we aren't that we don't even see what we do have and the value behind it. And gratitude is about it's about being grateful for what remains, being grateful for what you have, being grateful and living in that space requires us to focus our attention on the present, focus our attention on the good things. We focus so much on red flags and what everybody else don't have and what we don't have. We don't even acknowledge the good stuff in people no more. And that also plays a role in a lot of the emotional, maybe disconnection that we experience, overwhelming feelings that we experience. And so we got to be willing to just get back into the present, ground yourself in gratitude. Okay. What are you grateful for? Name one thing you're deeply grateful for, one person you're grateful for. Looking inwardly, what are you proud of yourself of? What are you excited for or anticipating today? And why is today going to be a great day? Start with those 5 every day. Okay. I do it all the time, and it's something that literally sets my day on a beautiful pace. Okay. And then lastly, I need you to get in a values list. Okay. These are really applicable. All right. Because I think what your values, especially if you're in a season of transition, right? A lot of the emotional wounds that you're experiencing that maybe are stemmed from places and seasons of transition, unexpected, disappointments and grieving points, right? Like, it's really easy to just kind of move forward or thinking that, hey, time's going to heal. We've talked about that before, and how time isn't the measurement of healing, but, you'll convince yourself from all these different perspectives of what's next. And in reality, I think it's a good opportunity for us to just reassess those things. What's important to you? What do you value? Right? As you're transitioning out of a marriage, out of a breakup, out of a relationship that you thought was going to be long lasting, as you transition out of a job that maybe didn't end well, as you transition from something that you're losing, okay, and you're having to hit the restart button, the refresh button, what matters to you most? Like, when we think about values, and this I can't take credit for, shout out to Dr. Zeb. He gives a unique definition of values. It's your attitudes, perspectives, beliefs, and principles about the world around you. Okay. And so when we think about listing out our values, you think about what's important to you. What do you care about? What do you value most that reflects your attitude, perspectives, beliefs, and principles on how you see the world around you? Of course, for us as believers, right, we got a lot of our principles, a majority of them, a lot from this very book here, right, the Bible, right? And of course, that's a spiritual foundation that we carry. But there's also stuff like your health. You say you value your health. You say you value fitness and wellness. You say you value peace. You say you value strong communication. Okay, cool. Right. So we start labeling those things, even as tears roll down our face, even as we're mourning and moving from relationships and places of grief and emotional traumas and wounds. Right. Like you, I just can't stress this enough, the importance to be kind to yourself in that space, because you didn't have an example. God knows you went back to the porn last night. God knows you went back to those spaces last night. Like, come on. God is not petty to hold that against you. He wants you to come back. He wants you to return. He wants you to rest in his presence, because in his presence, there's rest and there's healing. So in the process of that, as you're mourning, as you're grieving, as tears may fall, as frustrations may be expressed, as there's moments of anger and bargaining and depression, and there's moments of denial, and there's moments of all these different fluctuating points in the grieving stages, what are the 5 to 7 things that I'm choosing to value moving forward? What's one of those values that I actually want to focus on this week? And what are some things that I can creatively and uniquely tend to help me build that value up? Oh, yeah. And that is something that will allow you to, again, not only be present in the now, but be able to shift your focus from what isn't to what is. Letting go of what should be or what you wish could be, to now acknowledging and accepting the reality of what is, so you actually have an opportunity to move forward. Because a lot of us are just clinging to what we wish to. And that's what's hurting us. That's what's keeping us bonded and bound in this heartbreak, drowning in it. And it's just not the life that God desires for you to live. So get your values list together. I think that's a really good place to start as well. And I think applying some of these principles and tools is something that gets you started in the place of unpacking your wounds and no longer running from your life. Because oftentimes what actually is necessary is for us to address the hard things, because that's where the real life is. We think we're running for life, but we've really been running from it because we're just afraid to address the emotional wounds that's actually keeping us in bondage. And I think the moment that you begin facing your wounds, partnering with the inner you that didn't know any better, that didn't have any language, any awareness for the experiences that you had, when you begin partnering with the version of yourself that is hurt in the midst of this, and you begin to feed yourself the nourishment that you need in order to overcome, partnering with yourself, partnering with your emotions, more importantly than anything, partnering with God, this is what's going to nourish you to full strength over time. And it's a process. And just know that Jesus has you covered and he won't lead you astray. And it's when we submit these things to him that he's going to make things right. And we have the opportunity to live a healthy, well life here earthly and not have to wait to die in order to experience a life of freedom. It's available to us today. And it starts by us no longer allowing ourselves to run from the hard things and not live life on the run, but listen and adhere to the invitation God is bringing us in towards. That gives us permission to release in order to receive the life he desires for us, which is always greater than the life we could ever picture for ourselves. Okay? I hope something in this message hit you. I hope something in this thought and in this video rested somewhere with you as we're on a journey to do the healing work. And the healing work starts with us stop running. Stop running. Stop running. It's going to keep coming. The thoughts are going to keep happening. Let's just stop running and playing ourselves and actually start embracing what we need to get the healing we need. And I think when you start doing that, things are different and life becomes better over time. Doesn't feel better. It's not easy by any means. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But we're in such a culture that everybody speaks in therapeutic languages, and yet we can see that like you actually aren't doing the work because you still got the same grievance list you had when you first walked into therapy. So like who really is off here? So I don't want to get into a rant and go crazy. But I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you. And I want you to leave a comment below. What's one takeaway you got from this video? What's one application you're willing to give a try? What's something that you just need to let go off your chest that's been a part of your experience? I want the comment section to be a safe place there. And of course, anybody who come in here and acting a fool, they gonna get blocked. Not even blocked. I'm sorry. I don't do blocking. They just gonna get reported. How about that? But I appreciate you guys so much for tuning into this video. If you like this kind of content, you want to hear more, subscribe, like the video, share this with a friend who needs to hear it, needs to withstand a little bit of a longer conversation, but one that is helpful and beneficial to their healing. And doing relationships the right way, which starts with us doing the healing work on ourselves first, which oftentimes means confronting our initial struggles and emotional wounds as a means of no longer running and now embracing the life we're always called to live. Okay? Until our next conversation, be easy and be breezy. Peace.